As the wheel turns, so the days are our rides. Yes, this is a soap opera industry perspective of the guy from a Noah Guy Bicycles, taking a look at basically the top topics that have been hitting our industry and how it's affecting us in bike shops as well as cyclists in as well. In any case, we're looking at a couple major kind of developments of change of the state. And there's been a big drop of news about Giant being targeted by U.S. Customs about poor labor practice and so forth. We're going to get to that in a minute because there's a couple interesting pieces to that, and what has been kind of changing in our local industry. The first topic is Pacific Cycles. Pacific Cycles is an interesting little journey, and let's start off of a little bit of history of Pacific Cycles. Pacific Cycles is a company that's made bicycles for essentially big box stores like Walmart, Target, and so forth over the years. And they also were part of the I think Durrell company, Durrell Sports, which was just purchased in 2001 here by Pond Holdings. Woo! Back it up. Who the heck is Pond Holdings? Pond Holdings, if you don't know, owns something close to 50 different bike companies, ranging from Cervelo, Santa Cruz, Cannondale, used to be GT, all the way down to, as we see in this article here, Specialized, or not Specialized, woohoo, that's a slip on words, Schwinn and Mongoose and Roadmaster, as long as some other ones out there. Well, this one's particular article is specifically targeting the Pond Bike, which is Pond Holdings of Pacific Cycles staffing. Well, they've had a little disruption, and I have a video of this in my library as well, of them basically cutting the line or shelving the line of GT. GT, Gary Turner, bikes have been bought and sold. They were part of this, I believe, Pacific Cycles, and they were shelved because they just didn't see enough income coming out of it, even though they were trying to rebrand it and it looked really good, but it just fell short on their numbers. It's an investment company, and it's an investment company. It's Dutch, and they own really big companies out there. They're affiliated with Caterpillar, I believe Porsche, Audi, possibly. They have some warehouse or distributing Volkswagens. They're pretty darn big. So that particular company owning a lot of bicycles, and they dived into this in the last 15, 20 years, and they've been doing pretty good with it, and they've also dived into retail. And they have retail locations under the name of Mike's Bikes. So they're kind of doing the same thing is Trek with retail front locations. They're doing a whole conglomerate of brand ownership as a big investment company. So they have their fingers in a lot of different things. And with a lot of big companies, they have enough money and weight to try things out, throw it on the wall, and if it fails, they cut it. So this is one of those scenarios where they're going to reduce the workforce for the second time in 3 years. The cycling industry has been going through a lot of disruption over those particular points. And again, this is something that is not unexpected because a lot of companies have been doing a lot of adjustments. But you know, it's another telltale sign of how the industry is behaving or basically responding to the current market, as well as a lot of other underlining things that have been a big disruption like tariffs and government policies and so forth. Try not to get too much into the political portion of this, but in any case, you know, these particular brands, Schwinn and Mongoose, they're primarily at Walmart, Target, some of the big box sporting good retailers like Dick's Sporting Goods, as well as Academy Sports, I believe, may have like a Mongoose. Roadmaster, I haven't seen a Roadmaster in decades, but in any case, they're not doing so well to the point where they need to reduce. Is this one of those things where they need to reduce to keep the company going? Most likely not. They may be reducing staff or departments where they will absorb in different parts of their companies for this. We're going to go through a huge reorganization for the next 3 to 5 years as these companies are navigating and going forward. As in the United States, products being sold, the tariffs are a scary thing for a lot of these companies to try to do forecasting and so forth. And Pond Holdings is a global company. As I mentioned before, they're huge. Therefore, they're going to try to navigate around those particular scenarios, and prices that we're seeing have been going up, and they're probably going to continue to do so, even from the Walmart brands to the big box brand, or to the big brands out there like their Civello and Canada and so forth, which we've already seen. So that's the first bullet here. I'm talking about specific cycles, and which just give you a little more clarity of who owns them. And I do have videos of Pond Holdings, so you can get a little more insights of their inner workings and what they have. But that's one of those telltale signs. So that's one of the lighter, I want to say lighter, those who are losing their jobs are not doing great here. But that is kind of an adjustment that we're looking at for sure. Merida opts to zero free policy for migrant workers in Taiwan. This is off of the heels of Giant getting slapped by U.S. Customs with cease bringing in products into the United States. Not sure if that's completely stopped yet or whatever. There's a lot of in-depth details on that, which if you want to watch my video from last week, we do discuss that pretty thoroughly, as well as my latest video on just Giant and what they're going through. Well, as a small recap, Giant got in trouble, or basically it's U.S. Customs got them in trouble by this article that was released. I think it was a Swedish article about labor conditions for contract migrant workers going into Taiwan. And that's where Merida is trying to get ahead of it, really, because they see what Giant is going through and their competitors. Giant is the largest bike manufacturer in the world. Right next to them, second largest bike manufacturer in the world, or in Taiwan. And they produce a lot of bikes as well, and a lot of big brand bikes too. Merida and Giant do a lot of OEM products, and they do not really like to tell whose products that they're making, but sometimes you can find out through the weeds of who is what. But in the years past, both Giant and Merida have made Trek, Specialized, and various other brands of bikes, and either from frames to parts to some componentry. But some, the main componentry of Shimano, SRAM, and Campanolo is their own company, is separate. There lies the complicity of this, because bicycles are complicated to put together, because the manufacturer, like Trek or Specialized, they design and create the frame and fork, and then they spec, meaning they buy all the other parts, stems, bars, whatever else, wheels, to go on their bikes, and componentry, shifting, and so forth from other companies. So it's basically a collage to build up any bike for the most part, unless it's the lower end ones where they're all stamped out in one factory. But most cases on the upper end, anywhere I would say anything above $500 in US dollars, is probably a hodgepodge of parts from several different companies. So therefore, Merida, as a leader of assembling and boxing up bikes to be shipped over to the United States, they are not wanting to have the disruption of U.S. Customs, as well as global public opinion, which is another huge piece that's weighing on these companies, because they're already having a hard time. Giant, and as well as Merida, is reported in the last month to the year of having either loss of profit, loss of sales, units going down, all the bad of the bad on the bad compounded on more bad. This did not come at a great time for them. There's a lot of chatter about why did U.S. Customs decide to do this now? Who knows? Not going to get into that, but it's basically the genie's out of the bottle, and now they're going to have to address it regardless. So this is what Merida is doing, and basically Giant did this back in January, before any of this hit, is basically have zero fees. Okay, just to knock it down to the nutshell for you, if you haven't heard about this or quite understand it, it's basically the migrant workers going from other countries into Taiwan, working for Giant and Merida and various other companies. they're basically a company that headhunts these people to get them into their country and back into those companies to work. They're kind of like a job finders, right? Here in the U.S., companies that are like, let's say like a medical company, like, or a hospital, will hire companies to go find particular workforce to work in, but they usually pay from the company. Well, these sub companies or workforce companies make, instead of the company that they're providing the services for, they're actually charging the employees, the migrant workers coming in. So that's really not proper and also illegal in the United States. So that's not what happens here. But their international law, it's a big slap on the hand. So they've been trying to change this or address it is for a while now. But basically, it got into the big headlines, and U.S. Customs, United States, is the first one to really just slap them on the hands and going, yeah, if you've done these changes, you better say you've done. So there lies Merida trying to do a move to, from here on out, not charging it, take on the costs of those employees for this company to bring in these migrant workers to work in Taiwan. We're talking like 270,000 individuals coming into Taiwan to work in their factories to provide products and so forth for us in the States and globally. So it is a pretty big deal. And with that being said, they're trying to, they know they've been doing bad, most likely, over these years. And now it's something they have to address, regardless of how their financial situation is. They better get ahead of this, or it's going to cost them a lot more down the line. And if they get ahead of it and have a positive light, they may look better than Giant, so they might be able to steal some business too. This is a huge PR nightmare for Giant, and it's a PR nightmare or challenge for all these other companies in Taiwan as well as globally if they're not doing best practices. So what they've done is they decided to have no fees and pay back and have all the reimbursements to former recruited employees by October 25th. That is pretty aggressive and quick. That being said, they're doing everything they can to get ahead of it, and Giant is kind of they're doing other things to try to combat it, but they're a little bit slower to the punch. So I think Merida may have an opportunity here to leverage it to help their company over Giant. But in any case, it's pretty tough. Then you haven't heard about Merida. Merida, it has their own bike line. So if you're out of the United States, you've heard of Merida as a bike line. They have just like Giant, they have their own bike lines, carbon, roads, so forth. You'll see, I don't know if you saw them on a tour, but you see them on other race circuits and so forth. And then they're a pretty big line. But then again, they're OEM. And guess what company that they do own and publicly do announce, say they do own a percentage of, 35% of Specialized Bikes. So Specialized Bikes got in trouble about 20 years ago. They needed some financial help. Merida backed them, and they've been basically hand in hand. Even though Specialized is its own company here in the United States, it still has strong ties and financial responsibility to Merida. And Merida did release a few months back, which I have a video on in my library, regards of them blaming basically the retail locations that Specialized has expanded, and that's cost them a pretty big chunk of money as an investment, and they're retracting. Yes, they're closing Specialized stores or shrinking or keeping the most profitable ones, however you want to look at it. Trek is not, they're in the same boat in that perspective. They are definitely reducing locations and keeping the ones that are actually more profitable, restructuring. That's the Merida bit of how they're all trying to get ahead of this huge labor problem. U.S. carbon rim manufacturer CSS Composite is closing. You may or may not know that if you're buying bikes with carbon wheels and what have you, may be white labeled This is a company that white labeled their rims, carbon wheels, to these various companies. So we got Bontrager, Rival Bikes, Evil Bikes, and Chris King. Chris King is, hubs and known for headsets and bottom brackets, and they had wheel sets, which, they didn't make the rims, so they probably had carbon rims made for them, as well as a Bontrager. Okay, Bontrager is a Trek product. Let's just get that straight. I saw a video that launched yesterday, and the individual was making it sound like Bontrager was its own entity company. It is not. Trek brought Keith Bontrager in-house in the 90s, and he had a steel line. And I know this because you see a banner right behind me of Bontrager, right there. We picked up, as a Trek dealer, we picked up Bontrager. We carried their steel bikes. They manufactured their steel bikes for a couple of years. They're out of Santa Cruz. Yeah, Santa Cruz. Got to look at the banner behind me. Look at that, Santa Cruz, California. USA made frames. It was kind of cool. Keith was been in our industry, several different industries for a long time. Before that, I didn't realize how old he was until he retired. So last year I have a video of it that Bontrager basically retired. He was done. Done working at Trek. I'm done. I want to go do fun things with my life and not live in Wisconsin and go somewhere else. And he's done his time. But Keith Bontrager, the Bontrager name has been used on products through Trek for good 2.5 decades easily. So when you look at the Bontrager here, that just mainly means Trek. And Trek has been phasing out a lot of the Bontrager name and a lot of their products. Although they did keep a few tires and possibly the carbon wheels, this is OEM. So when you're looking at this article, and unfortunately, this company basically did an abrupt belly up. In other words, people were having problems getting warranties done and so forth, and all of a sudden, boom, lawyers come out, we're going bankrupt, we're selling all our machinery, it's done. So these companies, not knowing really if they were really involved with CSS Composites currently, because a company like this, when they start getting crippled and they start going down a downturn, it sounds abrupt, but this may have been a lingering issue over the last 2 to 3 years, especially with all the constant economical changes and disruptions that we've had in the last 2 years. And that just hasn't been in 9 months. It's been over a couple of years of problems with the cycling industry. So these companies, Trek, Bontrager, Rival Bikes, they have their own little story there, and I do have a video, I believe, of theirs. They were sold to an investment company, drove into the ground, and the original owners bought it back. And they are probably not buying because most of their bikes are now being made in Taiwan and being shipped direct to consumers. That's their new business model. So most likely they're not really having any wheels currently on their new mix. Not sure about Evil Bikes. How they play or if they're still buying stuff. But I'm pretty sure Trek, when they did the reduction of their inventory of 40% about 2 years now or 1.5 years now, that might have been one of those things that reduce it. And then again, they're not building any bikes in the United States. So are they having the wheels built here, then shipped to Taiwan or Cambodia in this case to be assembled and put back on? Or is it an aftermarket product? Not too sure. And I don't think that if they did have anything still, it's very minimal. Chris King is probably the one that's probably affected the most. That would be my assumption, because their products are built here in the United States and that they're probably doing a wheel assembly. Although there's probably several other companies here. What this means to the consumer is those particular rims no longer have a warranty. Those rims, if they still have under warranty, which is usually about 2 years, with these companies like Bontrager, Trek, Rival or Evil, or even Chris King, those warranties, if they still are valid, those companies are going to either eat the warranty, like, okay, yeah, it's been warranted, or they're not going to get a credit back from CSS. They're just going to have to eat it and provide you a credit or another wheel set from a different manufacturer. Although the volume of this, I don't think for either Trek or Chris King will hurt them. The more of a problematic nuisance for the Trek Bontrager Rival bikes, probably not, since they went through a transition back. So a lot of those pre-year warranties may not be valid, or they may have expired by now. Evil Bikes, I do not know them very well, so I can't really comment on their state of the state. But I mean, Chris King is probably the one that probably felt the biggest hurt on this. Revel Bikes, it did talk about a couple years ago, really good stuff, and they had a decline over the time. Will this hurt? Yes, and it does. It is sad, and the employees no longer have a job, and I think they're in Utah. It's one of those situations where it's a company they probably didn't have. I mean, they still had a staff and all of that, but the companies that they sold to are going to have to find other sources of carbon wheels. And if they're trying to produce bikes in the United States, as their current administration is trying to force upon us to do, manufacturing wise, that is not going to work well. You'd think a company like this would get subsidies and reimbursement to be able to bolster the company and like, oh, we're going to build more stuff here. I don't think we're seeing that, or they're in troubled times underwater to actually address those issues. And unfortunately, that just kind of there's other couple of companies have went under, and like Univega, they closed the plant. I think it was Univega, or at least International said they closed one of the plants, that there was assembly plant. They were building their bikes. So I'm not sure if it was Univega one or what. I know the brand that they had was Univega, and they were advertised as one of the companies that was building and assembling in the United States. And there's a couple other companies that are doing that now. But it's just it's just a troublesome time, and companies that you'd think that would be able to take advantage, it might be too late for them to be able to take advantage of what is being trying to be directed as our economic or as our manufacturing in the United States. It's always been smart manufacturing. We only want to do the stuff that we know we can do well, and it makes sense. Thanks for watching the latest installment of the top news of As the Wheel Turns, So Do Days of Our Rides opinion piece. Hopefully you got some insights of what a perspective of a bike shop is with the current events that are going on around them. Yeah, it's still a little muddy waters, but week in and week out, we try to do our best and navigate that for our customers and our community. Well, in any case, thanks for hanging out with me in the garage. If it's nice in your neck of the woods, please go for a ride. Until next time, have a wonderful day.